few minutes while everyone's filtering in. But yeah, welcome to the next BSV Wales meetup. This is our Q2 meetup for the year. So I'll say we'll give it a few seconds just to let everyone get here, and then I'll set things up and we'll do the introductions. But yeah, thanks for everyone for coming so far. Okay, so while we're waiting, I'll also just quickly give you a background to the event today. So as you see, the title is Saving the Internet, which is a pretty bold statement, and it's meant to be getting the kind of creative juices flowing for the discussion today. But really what we want to tap into is this discussion around some of the problems facing the internet at the moment. So I'm sure many of you will have heard, problems around data privacy, ownership of data, fake reviews, fake bots online, fake activity, how that influences things from elections to kind of consumer decisions. And these are issues that are coming up more frequently in the media. So this is something that we think about quite a lot in the blockchain world, especially in Bitcoin SV. And we think about how we can apply technology to solve these problems. So what different routes do we have to solve this, and are all these solutions technological? Are they sociological? Are they to do with kind of incentives? So today we're going to dig into some of these questions in a little bit more detail and try and get to the bottom of them and see ultimately, is there something we can actually start thinking about doing to solve these problems? And so to help us do that, we've got three really excellent speakers joining us tonight. So we have, unfortunately, David couldn't be with us in person, but he sent us kindly a really good talk that we're gonna play for you in the middle, that'll kind of really get you thinking about things from not just a blockchain perspective, but kind of other technological avenues. But we do have with us live Connor Murray and Luke Bronaz, who are going to very kindly talk a little bit more about their platforms and how they're tackling these problems in slightly different ways, but also rooted in this kind of Bitcoin technology that we like to investigate further. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the first presenter, Connor. I'd like to introduce. So Connor is the co-founder of Brightview and his platform. He's going to talk about a bit more tonight. But yeah, I'll let Connor take it away to talk to us about how he's using the blockchain to help, as I say, verify online reviews and tackle that aspect of the problem. So Connor, please feel free to take it away.
Great, thank you, Jack. Thank you for having me. I'm going to talk. Obviously, I'm going to talk about Brightview and specifically a new platform that we built to solve the fake review problem using the blockchain. But in the theme of the panel here, saving the internet, I'm just going to talk just generally about some of the problems with the internet today. And we can't solve all of these ourselves, but I think thinking about how moving into the future, other entrepreneurs and other developers can think about these problems, and just generally, how can we use the blockchain itself to create a better internet? So, I'm pretty young. I'm 28, but I still remember when I first got involved in the internet when I was a young kid. And for me, AIM was probably the first viral app that I used. And I remember just being amazed that you could go home from school and chat with people that you're just at school with. And that created its own culture itself around instant messenger. Then we had a lot of peer-to-peer protocols emerge. I remember going on LimeWire, and I remember downloading music at the slowest rate possible. And you're a little kid and you think you're really cool using LimeWire and everything else. But the internet has evolved slowly and then rapidly into essentially an ad-driven model. So every single website that you use, probably 99% of them have an ad-based revenue model. This has some benefits. Obviously, the internet is free to use. Various sites are free to use. But it means that the incentives behind the businesses and the companies are ad-driven. And it also means that the content that you're viewing may be ad-driven itself and not quality-driven. So this has also produced a subsidized internet. And so what I mean by that is, for example, if we just take the case of YouTube, for example, YouTube is free to use. So you can go onto YouTube, you can upload a gigabyte size video of your, maybe you create a vlog, you have some kind of creative idea, and then YouTube's going to host that video for free. You can share that link to whoever you'd like. So that's really beneficial to independent content creators, right? Prior to the expansion of YouTube, if you wanted to create maybe like an animated show and you wanted to get people to watch it, you had to go through the gatekeepers of the entertainment industry. So that's a really good thing, but it also means that because it's so heavily subsidized by Google and they infer all the costs of storing all that video data, it means that a lot of crap gets through too. So inherently, when it's being subsidized by that large company, you're gonna have a lot of people just uploading crap that you may not actually want. And so the question that we have to consider is, are these giant subsidized platforms going to create, is quality gonna rise to the top? And that's not always true, especially if we are still using an ad-driven model, because if businesses don't want to advertise certain content, that means that content won't get seen. So there's still work to do from the perspective of how can we get the best quality content, and the best quality content is usually the content that people want to pay for. The flip side of this heavily subsidized internet is also that it's a heavily siloed internet. So what that means is, for example, all of my content on Twitter, if Twitter decided to remove me from the platform, I have no recourse, essentially. I have no way of taking my content from Twitter and moving it to a new platform. So ultimately what I'd like to see, I know what Luke would like to see, I'm sure he'll talk about it, is essentially standards that we can build across protocols so that if I don't like your company, I can move to a different platform very easily. And then we also have an insecure internet. The problem with the internet today is that everything goes through third-party servers, and then we are trusting that those third-party servers are, one, secure, and then number two, so for example, let's say, so I used to work in the medical record industry, and the medical record industry is very heavily regulated when it comes to patient data access and things like that. But with that said, all of the information is held by private companies, and the people that work at those private companies, because they have to do their job, have access to that data, right? They have access to the servers, they have access to whatever else. And there are logs. So for example, if it's against the law for me, for example, to access even my own patient record if I worked at this company. But I could access that record, delete the log that I accessed it, and walk away. So the fact that logs can be deleted on servers is a big problem. It's how hackers get away with what they do. So that inherent process is very insecure. While we have secure protocols built around the internet, it's inherently insecure as long as we're relying on third-party servers to manage data access. And then finally, payments over the internet is atrocious. So we rely on third-party payment systems that inherently siphon data from you. Anyone inside of Bitcoin is already familiar with this, but it also is very costly. So we can't do micropayments over the internet because if I'm going to pay by credit card, which is currently the best electronic way of paying over the internet, aside from Bitcoin, it doesn't make sense for a payment processor to take like a half of a cent of a transaction, because they're just going to lose all of that in transaction fees to their respective parties. So that's why when you go to like the LA Times or you go to the New York Times, they're going to make you subscribe for some kind of large subscription price, and then you can read articles. But what if I just want to pay maybe 5 cents to read an article or 10 cents to read an article? We can start to explore different monetization mechanisms. And actually, like we were saying earlier, chip away at some of those gatekeepers to content creation. So here's how I think we should save the internet with Bitcoin. The 3 properties of Bitcoin that help us to improve the internet. Number 1, it has a native way of making payments over the internet. And then obviously that extends to micropayments, which prior to the invention of Bitcoin was impossible. A second, in a similar vein, a peer-to-peer method of secure communication. So what that means is that inherent to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin uses ECDSA, we can have peer-to-peer exchange of information securely. So that allows us to build some of these more secure methods of authentication, of data transfer, and things like that. And then finally, and this is the most important when it comes to our business and how we're using it, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is a global timestamp ledger to enable full auditability. So what that means is, because the Bitcoin blockchain is public and it's global, right? Our goal with Bitcoin SV is to have the blockchain encompass everything. It means that I can actually use the ledger as a timestamping ledger, and I can prove data authenticity. I can prove the existence of something at a certain point in time, and I can prove ownership of something at a certain point in time. So I'm going to talk now. So we're focused on online reviews. So BrightView itself is an online review platform, very similar to the existing ones out there, but we introduce monetization into content creation. So in my opinion, online reviews have three major problems with them. Number one is the incentive problem. That's what this screenshot here is expressing to you. This is the world that we live in right now. It was some of the best Italian food I've had. And I told her I'm going to post it on Instagram where I have over 11,000 followers. But when the check came, there was literally no discount at all. So I gave them 1 star. So that's one example of a very poor quality review. But in this review is actually a lot we can garner from the incentive mechanism behind reviews. For most consumers, about 40% of them are actually going to leave a review if they have a positive experience at a restaurant, for example. Even less if it's not a restaurant. But this is a problem for businesses because reviews themselves are the most effective form of advertising. So you can spend thousands of dollars on a marketing campaign, but it's going to do nothing for you compared to a lot of high quality reviews for your business. If you're a highly respected business, let's say you're the best pizza place in your city, reviews are going to drive traffic more than any kind of marketing campaign that you buy. So this is good, but it creates the problem inherent to review platforms today, which is that fake reviews are now very valuable for businesses because you can see this if you go on Amazon, for example. A lot of those crappy products that are manufactured in China, for example, that are just knockoffs that don't do what they say they're going to do. They have like a ton of 5-star reviews with broken English and great product, whatever else, but we have no way of verifying if they're actually real. And like I said, this all tied to the incentive mechanism for the business because the businesses need these reviews to drive traffic. So most of us have probably encountered obviously fake reviews in your experience. The data suggests that everyone kind of feels like they see fake reviews all over the place. And you can actually read, so there's a ton of data about all of this, but I find this really interesting. So men are kind of jerks. Apparently, if we leave fake reviews, 28% of us will do it just because it's funny. Some people just feel like it. And then the most common for restaurants, at least in the United States, is if a restaurant makes national news for, let's say discrimination practices or insert whatever else there is that people want to get outraged about, that will make national news, and then people will flood to these third-party review platforms and then just flood them with negative reviews. Or vice versa, if something makes the national news for something that people generally regard as very good, they will go to the review sites and spam it with really positive reviews. But that's actually still not an indicator of the truth, right? So how are we solving this? So we've created a platform called Veritas that links directly with our BrightView application. Veritas is an API that anyone can use to solve this fake review problem. So I'll talk about exactly how it works in a minute. But I just wanted to clarify it. So the blockchain, like I said, gives us an immutable timestamp ledger. So, and then the fake review problem is ultimately, we want to make sure we can solve the problem of, I want to validate that this person leaving the review actually patronized this business or had an experience with this product, right? So we're doing that using the blockchain pretty simply. So at point of sale, a receipt is always issued to the purchaser. So what we're going to do is actually issue that receipt onto the blockchain and create essentially a token. But we don't have to use anything blockchain-y to get this across. we're already familiar with QR codes. So actually during COVID right now, if you go to, there's a lot of businesses around here in the US where when I get the receipt, there's already a QR code on there to actually contact us pay. So we're going to leverage that. And when you get that receipt, you maybe scan a QR code, maybe click a link, if it's emailed to you, however else you want to do this. That unique token, which is the receipt on the blockchain, can now be spent onto the blockchain to leave a review. So we can actually do is link the review to the point of sale itself. And then when that review is made, we can pull all of that data into BrightView. So BrightView will be our global map for all this data. And then we can have a verified link via the payment processor to validate that the person actually went to the store via brick and mortar. So this is actually very similar to what Amazon does today. But Amazon controls the distribution of those goods when you order them from Amazon. So what we're doing is actually bringing a verified review API into the wild with any merchant. So we have people using this right now. We'll have some cool announcements about that later. But the benefit of this platform is it's very easy to use. It's just a simple API call when the receipt is issued, and an API call when the review is made. And then we also allow the businesses themselves or the payment processors to issue rewards in exchange for those reviews. So to solve that incentive mechanism for you to garner feedback from your customers, businesses can issue gift cards, coupons, anything that they want to reviewers in exchange for a review. Now, the important thing to note for that is that it's just a simple smart contract. So when the review is made, that reward is unlocked, whether the review is positive or negative. So it's not like businesses can bribe positive reviews. That bribe, if you want to call it that, is for any review itself, whether it's positive or negative. And then this also will allow businesses to log on to BrightView and then issue rewards to engage with customers themselves. Because another fact about reviews is that if a negative review is left, other people are more likely to still visit the business if the business owner responded to those reviews. So what we're going to allow businesses to do is to respond to the reviews, and then also if someone had a bad experience at your restaurant, for example, you can issue them a $5 gift card or something like that to say, hey, I'm sorry about the bad experience, come back, try us again. So that's all native into this API. This is available right now, so if you want to use this, if you have a use case, if you're a payment processor, or just a developer and you want to prove authenticity of use of something, you can get in touch with us. We'll make a more formal, there'll be a portal very shortly that you can sign up for it and everything else, but I'm not quite ready to do that. But if you like early access, you can shoot me an email. But we're really excited for to announce kind of who's using that and how we're going to use that in the future. So that said, that's how we're saving one very, very small part of the internet. And thank you for watching.
Thanks, Connor. That was a really fascinating talk, and I've been a big fan of what you guys are doing for a while. I'm not sure if you're aware, this is the kind of, there's been some quite high profile examples of fake reviews going viral. I don't know if you're familiar with the one about a hole in the wall. There was one to do with a Barclay or NatWest ATM, I think, and it became national news because everyone was saying how good it was. It was an incredible site, and then tourists ended up going to this ATM machine in the middle of nowhere. So it can have some, even though it seems funny, people wasted their time and money going to see it. So it can be fun and games, but it's a serious thing, especially for, I guess, presumably things like small businesses. Like, who do you think are the main beneficiaries of this kind of review system, or is it kind of any business at all, would you say?
Yeah, well, so I think for us, the important target market is brick and mortar merchants, because brick and mortar merchants have no way of, so there's two things. Number one, because we issue the receipt onto the blockchain and then tie it to the review, it allows the merchant to get context around the review as well. So something that happens right now is if the review is made, you kind of have to be like, do I remember that customer? Who served them? What day was it? What time was it? All that kind of stuff. We can have that just inherently for the merchant themselves once the review is made. So that can help them. Maybe there's one staff member that's causing a lot of issues for their business. They can kind of get that data immediately from any feedback that comes in. But then also, there's just nothing like this for them right now. So obviously, electronic delivery of goods, we can pretty accurately create some kind of verified link. If I'm electronically delivering you something, I can generally validate that when you leave feedback, did it come from that person, even if it's on like a third-party server or whatever else. But I think the benefit for us, in my opinion, for brick and mortar, the blockchain gives us this very easy global system to like tie the physical into the digital, and then also let them engage with consumers in a way that speaks to them, which is rewards, and even if it's just money, right? Allowing the merchant to engage with the customers in a way that speaks to them, which is like, hey, thanks so much for coming, having a good experience. Here's some money to come back and have more good experiences with us, right? So
you're engaging that kind of disconnect between the business and the consumer that you get sometimes online as well, right?
Yeah, and it also has to go through the payment processors. I mean, we're targeting payment processors really heavily right now because they're just really well positioned to, especially companies like Square and Stripe. They already do this, right? They email you a receipt. Sometimes they ask you for feedback, but that feedback isn't public. There's really still no incentive to leave that feedback. So we're targeting a lot of payment processors because they already kind of have this infrastructure there. But ultimately, we want to be the verified review site. That's our goal. So.
Cool. That's really cool. Yeah, and I guess so. You said you're tackling one small problem, on the internet, which is sensible instead of taking it all on. But it's also you've chosen a specific tool in the blockchain as something to achieve that with. So I guess we had one question that came in about why are you using Bitcoin? And just to clarify, because you'll be using Bitcoin SV, one of the different versions, but maybe first, can you clarify? So the role of the blockchain in this, is it primarily for the data you mentioned it because of recording the receipts, or where does the currency aspect come into it for you? And then as a follow up, why did you choose Bitcoin SV as the kind of currency component?
Yeah, so for Veritas itself, we don't need BSV at all. You don't need the currency. You don't need anything like that. It's all just a data protocol, right? So Bitcoin SV allows us to insert tokenized rewards very easily because Bitcoin SV, because of the fees are so low, because it's actually scalable, we can issue tokens really cheaply. But as far as Veritas itself, there's no element of using it as a currency. And that's, in my opinion, very good because we don't need to just target. For example, if I go to a brick and mortar store and I pay in US dollar, if I get that reward, that's maybe a $5 coupon. Well, that's issued on the Bitcoin SV blockchain. I don't ever have to know anything about Bitcoin SV. I don't need a Bitcoin SV. I may not need a wallet to utilize that. So that's really important to us. With that said, Brightview does use Bitcoin SV as the currency because that allows us to have micropayments. So Bitcoin SV is the only thing that lets you do micropayments without spending more than you're sending.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Sounds like you got someone sending a bad review in the background. So yeah, we will. But yeah, I think that's the key thing for you as a business. You mentioned your users won't necessarily think, even though the technological component is a blockchain, you as a business are using the currency because that's the currency for the data of the chain. That's how you get data on the chain. But your actual users, they don't need to be concerned with that. It's not, it's not of interest to them really. All they see is the token system that you're kind of implementing on top, right?
Yeah, I think that's an important strategy because businesses should look at that of we're using the BSV to pay fees for the data entries and all that kind of stuff, which is what you have to do to get miners to accept things. But we're doing that for the users so that they don't ever have to touch BSV. With that said, we have an onboarding strategy to get them a wallet once they sign up and all that kind of stuff. But we can have all this working without the user knowing or caring about BSV.
Yeah, cool. That sounds very sensible. Okay, well, thanks so much, Connor. I think we'll we might have some more questions come in, but we'll maybe leave them until the kind of panel session at the end, and we'll move on to our next speaker. But thanks very much for sharing that. That was really, really interesting. So next up, we have our talk from David Clubb. Now, David, as I mentioned, couldn't be with us tonight, unfortunately, but he's been very kind and actually pre-recorded a presentation for us. So David is a partner at Fallon, who are kind of involved in future generations thinking projects and lots of sustainability projects. So he has kind of a long background in rethinking kind of how things are done. And he's also, I understand, very passionate about something called distributed social media, or as you'll find out, what he calls the Fediverse. So this is going to be an interesting talk, just 10 minutes or so. It gives you an insight into how you can, where Connor was attacking and trying to solve this problem for verified reviews. David's now going to look at the problem of social media in general, and what's wrong with the current models we have for social media. And I believe he's not necessarily using blockchain to tackle this, but it's interesting to have another perspective on what other technological machinery do we have at our disposal to try and tackle these problems. So I'm going to switch over now to this brief presentation and leave it to David to talk us through how that works. And then we'll rejoin at the end for our third presentation.
Hi everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation to present tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you, but I had an invitation I couldn't refuse from my wife, so I'm currently in the Aqua Park in Cardiff Bay. I'm going to present to you something I call Unpacking the Fediverse and Why Surveillance Capitalism is Bad. So hopefully this gives you a bit of an insight into some of the amazing stuff that's happening in the open source social media world at the moment. So it's going to be split into 4. We have a word about social media, what came before the Fediverse, what changed to kickstart the idea of open source social media, and then a little bit about the practicalities of the Fediverse itself. So firstly, talk about social media. So I think that social media has revolutionized human communication, and it's done that in ways that are potentially for the bad as well as for the good. I'm giving this talk based on the idea that we're interested in things that are good about it. So social media can give a voice to those who are currently voiceless or who have been voiceless. So you don't necessarily have to know your MP or a big company directly. If something goes wrong, you can complain directly on social media. And it allows people to organise and interact in ways that can be extremely positive, as well, of course, as in ways that are not so good. Issues around the things that can be potentially bad, issues around well-being, so people spending perhaps way more time than is healthy on social media, and that can affect your mental health as well as physical health. Surveillance capitalism, which I'm going to go into in considerably more detail. The subversion of democracy is an issue, and the fact that people tend to have a discourse in ways that are very different to what they would have in real life with people. And the fact that algorithms funnel users of social media sites down channels in which they already have preconceived ideas and doesn't expose people perhaps to different ideas. So, as I say, we presuming here for this talk that you value good outcomes of social media over bad, and that's maybe why you've got an interest in considering open source social media. So before the Fediverse, there were the surveillance capitalists, and they started early, so 20 years nearly now since LinkedIn start. A bunch of other ones came along later, and of course there's a whole host of other ones. The fact that they started a long time ago, by and large, is interesting because the science behind social networking shows that if you have an existing network with a large number of users, that will tend to create or attract more users than ones which are started more recently. So later technology like open source social media networks have a bigger job in trying to attract users. The kind of big players in the tech field would be names that are very familiar to everybody, and my question is, in what way are these companies accountable? Because they are by and large not accountable to national parliaments, international laws. They lobby vociferously for less regulation. They're private companies, and in that sense their only accountability is to their shareholders, not to their users, not to you or I, but to their shareholders. In the case of Facebook, these would be some big companies and a particular individual, and for Twitter, and I'm sure for most of the other social media networks, they are big financial institutions. So effectively they're accountable to themselves. And for me, that's not a particularly comfortable place to be as one of their users. So what changed? Well, the big thing that changed was in terms of our understanding of the problems with social media platforms, was the Cambridge Analytica file. So this was a big kind of scoop by The Guardian and some other newspapers to unravel the fact that Cambridge Analytica was illegally harvesting data from hundreds of thousands of users to obtain data of tens of millions more. A company invested in and with very close links to the Conservative Party in the UK and the Republican Party in the States, and in particular the Trump campaign. And the Cambridge Analytica data enabled organisations to funnel money into targeting individuals on a very surgical level, and in a way that was basically illegal. So that suddenly has got people understanding that social media platforms, there are implications to using them, and there are implications to what happens to your data if you use them. If you're interested in this kind of issue, then there's plenty of information out there. I can't cover it all today. There's also some fascinating stuff out there on the implications to democracy from social media platforms, and Carol Cadwalla's talk on in TED was a great one, but there's others out there as well. There was a report that came out following the 2019 general election in the UK talking about how bad advertising was, and basically how social media plays a big role in misinformation. And one of the issues that arises is that there's no regulation basically on social media platforms, and says all that needs to happen is agreement by political parties to their advertising being subject to the same regulation as all other advertising, and something tells me that the political parties are not going to agree to that. So if we can't rely on our political leaders to do the right thing in terms of social media advertising when it comes to democracy, we have to do something about that ourselves. So you see that from the timeline, it wasn't until considerably later that Mastodon came along, and then Pixel Fed 2018. So Mastodon is, think of it as Twitter but open source, and Pixel Fed is like Instagram but open source. So these organizations, these platforms, I think they're functionally excellent, but of course because they haven't been around as long, they don't have as many people on them, so they suffer from this effect where the early movers scoop most of the users. So what changed? We understand the issues differently, and we understand that we're not customers, we're servants of our social media masters, and developments in code and technology that have enabled us to see alternatives and to use those alternatives. So that brings me on to the Fediverse. Fediverse stands for Federated Universe, and we're talking about basically distributed social networks. So it's not a social network as we would previously have understood it. These ones are decentralized, and each member of each site can communicate with users of any other linked site. So a decentralized network. So a centralized network is something like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of the others, where there's a single company that holds all the data and can do whatever it wants within law and within reason with that data, which is extremely lucrative because data is valuable, has value to advertisers, and they can make a huge revenue from selling that. And so Facebook in this example is responsibility for the data. Mastodon, so open source Twitter if you like, isn't centralized. There's no company that owns that data. Your data is yours. In this example, we have people who are on Mastodon Scot, so the instance of Twitter, which is particularly for people from Scotland, and then the equivalent from Wales, and they can talk to each other. So you can join a server from sort of any different bit of this open source Twitter, and it'll still talk to all of the other bits of open source Twitter. So it's decentralized. There's no advertising. There's no surveillance. The data is yours. You can download it and do what you like with it. You can download it and join another instance if you want to. But there's nobody's making a profit off your data. So centralized networks are bad. Decentralized networks are good. And they're also federated by and large, so it means they will talk nicely to other platforms. So we know that Twitter doesn't want its users interacting natively, directly with Instagram, because every time a Twitter user looks at Instagram, they're not looking at Twitter. And if they're not looking at Twitter, they can't see an advert on Twitter. The same for Instagram. If you're looking at an Instagram post, you can't be looking at a Twitter post at the same time, so you can't be seeing a Twitter advert. So these companies go to lengths to make sure that they can't, users from one platform can't natively interact with the user from another. However, open source social media networks that are federated do allow that. So in principle, and in practice, as I'll show you, a tweet from open source Twitter can be seen by a user of PixelFed, the open source Instagram, and vice versa. So in this example, here's what would be like TweetDeck, if you like, for open source Twitter, which is Mastodon. So on the right hand side, you can see that's actually a PixelFed post, so like an Instagram post, but it's turned up on my Mastodon timeline. It's like a Twitter timeline. So it'd be like somebody posting on Instagram and it just pops up in your Twitter timeline. And that's the original image there in the open source equivalent of Instagram. The other nice thing about social media, the open source social media world, is that it sort of inoculates itself against intolerance and online hatred and bigotry. So if people jump onto these networks and let's just say be bad, for want of a better description, according to these community guidelines, are racist, sexist, or whatever, then they can just be kicked off. And if they all, as it happened in this example, they all joined in together and created their own kind of network, well, all of the other networks just refused to communicate with them. They kind of inoculated themselves against it. So it's a much kinder, more interesting, less sort of shouty. I mean, there's no shortage of opinion on these open source social media networks, but there's much less of this really kind of vile, worst of human nature type stuff. So as long as you adhere to community guidelines, you can more or less say what you want. So I would say jump in there, have a look at Toot Wales or Toot.Cymru, make an account. If the Wales thing isn't your interest, then there's plenty of other sites which will have all sorts of interests which will hopefully appeal to you. So go to joinmastodon.org and take a look at that. Same for PixelFed. Download all your photos from Instagram and upload them all to PixelFed and just delete your Instagram account. You don't need that anymore. If you're interested in other sorts of open source social media, head to fediverse.party. I'll give you a flavour of some of the other types. So if you're on Twitter, head to Mastodon, PixelFed instead of Instagram, Lemmy instead of Reddit, Bookworm instead of Goodreads, PeerTube instead of YouTube, Mobilizon instead of the event sort of organisations, Friendica instead of Facebook, and there are a whole bunch more. If you've got any queries about any of this stuff or you want to find out a bit more, then please connect with me on Mastodon. I am at davidoclub at toot.wales. I'm also on PixelFed. And remember, every tweet feeds the beast. Every second that we're on surveillance or capitalist social media sites, we feed value to their shareholders and we undermine our own democracy. So I say ditch them all and join the open source social media revolution. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that talk from David. Certainly some interesting points there, and it's clearly highlighted some of the issues with social media, and especially how difficult it is with these network effects to actually overcome what the power they already have in terms of if there are credible solutions there. So while I was taking some notes during that, and during the panel session at the end, in David's absence, I'll kind of try and keep the conversation going from his perspective, and try and pick up on some of the points he made, and maybe ask Connor and Luke to talk about some of those. But for the time being, please still add your questions if you have anything that you're interested in learning more about or questioning from any of the talks so far. Please put the questions in the chat, and then we'll hopefully circle back around to those in the panel session at the end. But for now, we've got our third of the three talks. I'm really excited to have Luke Rowan as here, one of the co-founders of Tonic Power. And if you're not familiar with Tonic Power already, then you're gonna find this really interesting, I think, because they're really rethinking the way that advertising works, and really, at the end of the day, advertising, I'm sure you know, is one of the bedrocks of how social media companies work. So I think this can go, a long way to tackling some of those things. So I'd like to invite Luke to join us and take it away and present a little update on Tonic Power. Thanks, Luke.
All right. Yeah, so that was pretty interesting to me. A lot of the sentiments that we got from the last two presentations, I definitely share. What we're trying to do and what my presentation is going to be about is a little bit less of the same content that you saw, but trying to describe how we're trying to build something that is compatible with these new types of models. We don't think advertising will die in all of this. I think it just needs to be reimagined a bit. So what we're really going to go over here is just kind of a recap of what we've been up to, over the past year or so quickly, and then getting into what our next steps are, just to kind of illustrate how we're trying to build something that works inside of this reimagined model for the internet. So over the last year, let's see, we've added a whole bunch of new stuff. Been pretty busy. We built a brand new web platform from scratch, released documentation, and put out a public API that you can integrate with your applications. We've introduced private campaigns, localized campaigns, so that you can have campaigns that only pay for traffic that come from certain countries. Written a whole bunch of documentation and guides for all that stuff, streaming widget, physical badges for flyers and advertisements that you want to do in print, browser plugin to make it very easy for promoters to kind of get links and share them online. We've added email notifications. There's a new labs feature in account settings that we'll talk about what that kind of does. Doesn't do much now, but as we start releasing new features, you can opt in to kind of have early access to some of these things. And also WordPress plugin. So, and some of the things that we're talking about is, deplatforming we see as a big issue, censorship on these platforms, and also people abusing systems like this with click fraud and things like that. So let's start going over the road ahead here. So I'm kind of disclosing a lot of stuff here, but I think it's more fun this way. So let's go through it. These are the things that we've got on our roadmap, on our immediate radar right now. There's lots of other things that could end up coming in and out of this. This isn't a guarantee of like this is the exact order that we'll do things in or whatever, but it does give an idea of what's on our radar. Public promoter statistics, that's actually semi out right now. It's one of these features that's behind the labs setting. Detailed campaign statistics. Much more platform integrations like we have with WordPress and things. We'll be adding plugins for other things so that integrating for conversions is not going to be quite so technical. And as I'm going through this, it kind of occurs to me I probably should do a little short sentence or two about what it is that Tonic Pow is even doing. Okay, so the existing internet, you have giant platforms that as we've heard the other speakers talk about, and the last speaker mentioning surveillance capitalism. What they're doing is following you around the internet, looking at everything that it is that you like, trying to understand and profile everything about you so that they can use algorithms to feed you advertisements directly in your feeds on these large platforms. And this is all inside of these kind of very big walled gardens that do rely on this network effect in order to sort of monopolize the ad space. There's only a handful of large ad providers that are kind of the go-to for big companies to do ad spend and such. And what we're trying to do is kind of democratize that and make a marketplace for both advertisers and promoters to come together and come to agreements. And it's almost like doing a sort of more of a word of mouth system where people can like something and then share it online. Okay, so continuing on with what we're doing in the future here. More platform integrations, and the thing to get at here is this is all about conversions. We do pay per click. So if somebody has a campaign for, say, the upcoming CoinGeek conference, you could go on Tonic Pow, make a link for that, and go share it on social media, wherever it is that you like, and you'll get paid. Currently, I think that campaign is 15 cents per click for sending somebody there. In addition to that, I don't know that this has been widely announced, but you could actually earn 10% on any ticket sales as well. So somebody goes on and buys one of those, fancy $1,000 VIP items that are available to purchase. That's a pretty nice payday for a promoter. So get out there and get that money. Okay, so continuing on with what we're doing here. Token support's coming. We'll talk more about a lot of these things. Adding more challenges. Anybody who's used Tonic Pow knows that we do a sort of a gamified experience. We're going to keep pushing forward on that front and have it be a lot of these challenges and achievements that earn you little rewards. We'll do a lot more of that. putting more of our stuff on chain and moving towards an on-chain protocol for a lot of this, and inviting other market participants. Open social integration. This is very much what was talked about in the previous segment, but there's a little bit more to say on that front, as we think Bitcoin can really enhance some of those ideas as well. Promoter and advertiser reputation. You'll see a little bit of this. We're going to take it a little bit further. Hopefully, Connor can help us out in this department. Adding credit card payments, PayMail support for campaigns, so that when you do get paid, you'll see the exact campaign that's paying you, a little icon in your wallet, and make the UX a lot nicer. And a huge one here is individual payout rates, which I'll talk about more. Currently, what we're working on is KYC integration, which is an optional feature. Payout rates, the individual payout rates, and also huge improvements to the reporting systems. Okay, so what we're trying to do is get to a place where people are coming to mutual agreements. Right now, there is a bit of a problem where if somebody shares a campaign and they have basically, let's say, no online audience, and they're sharing it in less effective places, they're getting the same payouts that you're getting if you are a perfect advertiser for this campaign. Maybe you have a huge audience that's just absolutely geared towards this one particular campaign. Those two people are getting paid the same amount. So that's something that we want to change. And the way that we see to do that is through a multi-pronged approach here. So I'll start, let's see. I'll start at the promoter statistics. So if you were to come to any agreement with something, the first thing that you actually need to do is get a sense for why this promoter would be good for something. And so a big part of what we've been doing is working on really improving the statistics that we show, so you can see where a promoter is kind of sending traffic from, just kind of a broad picture of that, and you know, some more information that might help an advertiser determine how good of a fit this person is for that particular campaign, which would then lead us to the next thing, this top item here, flexible individual pricing. We're going to allow people to actually negotiate their individual rates. So instead of a flat 15% rate, there could be, maybe they start with a lower rate, but you would be able to make a bid, or they would be able to reach out to individual promoters and make them an offer for higher rates. Reputation discovery, this is not something I'm going to cover too much in here, but you know, this also plays into it, letting people do, put proven reviews of somebody who's done something. You've done business with this one promoter for your campaign, and now you can review them, and vice versa. And then the optional KYC integration allows us to know that a person has been verified, that we know that there's some kind of real identity associated with this person. And this would enable advertisers who care about that to offer higher rates based on that requirement. So talking a little bit about that, there's really two pieces to the verification. This is a typical verification that you see on any other service that does any kind of KYC process. And this is completely optional, like I said. It will kind of come in two pieces. On creating the campaign, you can opt in to requiring this for any promoters. And then also, if a promoter does go through the verification, they can publicly show that they've gone through this and they have this kind of verification in place. This is kind of a look at the breakdown, what it will look like on a promoter profile when we're showing some statistics. So you'll get a breakdown of where they're sending traffic from without, showing any kind of, too much to where it's violating some privacy or something like that. And breakdown of just kind of, when it is that they're active, and their history. And you could toggle here between just sort of actual click data versus views, and the charts will update. That's a small piece of sort of a larger project, but it gives you a sense for what we're adding. And this actually is already live under that lab setting that I mentioned. It's in the settings on your account page. Campaign statistics. So I really wanted to get a screenshot of the new dashboard that we're working on. Unfortunately, our staging environment just has very little data, and I had to put this together sort of last minute, so I ended up just kind of putting some bullet points here instead. But I really did want to show this off because it's very cool. But what this lets a campaign creator do is, when you create a campaign and you start having promoters that sign on, you get much more information, since you did make an individual agreement with this person. you're seeing a little bit more than what it is that we would show publicly, including kind of where they're sharing these links and things like that. And this helps you to figure out, you know, how valuable is this particular promoter for this campaign, and, you know, adjust those rates that you're negotiating on and things like that. So here's kind of a little look at the individual payouts. So it's really just this little box where you'll be able to, from the campaign page, if you're a promoter, you know, make an offer directly right there for, hey, I see you're giving 15 cents a click, but, you know, I'll do it for 20. Or I see, you know, or the 15 cents is fine, but I want, you know, a higher percentage. I want 15% of purchases on tickets instead of 10. And this can actually go back and forth, and you could put custom rates in there for each conversion goal that campaign has enabled. The same system works the other way. You'd have a hire button on all the promoter profiles where you'd be able to click and make an offer to a person who you think might be a perfect fit for your campaign. And maybe you're going to sweeten the deal a little bit to get them to sign on and share it. Next is, you know, maybe I shouldn't have put this in here because it's a little early, but after we get through this individual payout stuff, our next major area of focus is going to be tokens. On the promoter side, you'll be able to earn tokens for sharing campaigns. That could be, you know, some advertiser has their own token. The advertiser actually can fund the campaign with their own token and then offer the promoter the chance to earn those tokens, maybe instead of BSV, but maybe in addition to, as well as the percentage chances to win individual NFTs based on their sharing activity. On the Tonic Pal side, we also plan to use tokens as well, but this will be in the form of issuing our own digital items and then later offering the chance to redeem those digital items for interesting things, as well as some other stuff that we can't quite talk about yet, but trust me, it's cool. The other big point I want to mention here is that we do plan on supporting multiple token protocols. You know, there's a bunch of options in the BSV space right now for this. And so, yeah, we plan on letting the market figure that out and not really try to put our thumb on the scale too much. You know, we'll have our opinions for our own digital assets that we issue and things, but as far as advertisers, we plan to support all of the main ones. And that is all for me on the presentation side of things. I did have a couple of notes related to the previous presentation here that I kind of wanted to mention. Specifically on the Fediverse stuff, there's some things that I think Bitcoin actually can bring into the fold that actually helps improve those ideas a little bit further. One is Bitcoin can provide, if we have sort of an open social protocol, like Connor alluded to, that many participants can come into. This is very similar to the Fediverse idea. And it allows us to add other things like individual signatures on posts. If I have some identity protocol, like something like Meta ID that's you know, generating tons of transactions lately, which is really great to see. But I know that there are some others that are out there that are in the works. You could be signing things with an identity, and then you could actually verify that the post that was made actually was made by that person. You could verify that independently of that individual node within the Fediverse. So this idea that, yes, of course, an individual node operator, website operator could censor certain information or you know, keep out whatever it was that was not in alignment with their values, and that's obviously subjective, and a lot of people have different opinions on what exactly that is. The important thing is that we could actually verify that the identity associated with the post did in fact make it, and I think that is an enhancement that Bitcoin can bring. Another one of these things, obviously, is there's no built-in micropayments mechanism in these platforms, which Bitcoin just kind of gives you. Let's see. The other thing is data permanence. If we have this sort of federated social protocol and it's really built on Bitcoin and the data is on Bitcoin, it's a bit more resilient and resistant to censorship. You might have a very quick effort by a group of people to censor something, where if it's something that's Bitcoin based, you probably could still surface that in another app if there was a concerted effort to suppress some important information from society or something like this. The I'm not an expert in how Mastodon works, but there are some things that I don't know if it's doing the right style in terms of like, does it actually encourage fragmentation? You heard in the last presentation that it's a little hard to get that, to overcome the network effect of the competitors. And I think if there is a push for everybody to sort of really be on the same page with the data structure and everybody's able to ingest this giant universe of information, it might help us break down that competition in network effect a lot faster than a sort of ad hoc approach of many nodes that only have a very small number of connections between them. Maybe this isn't as much of a concern as I assume, but that's my first impression. The other thing I wanted to mention is some of the things that are going on in the BSV ecosystem related to this, and that is things like I already mentioned, Meta ID. Libs has something called Universe. There is BitcoinSchema.org, which is something I only recently kind of started talking about, and that's an idea that's like schema.org for kind of explaining data structures for common things like likes and posts and shares. And there's an example of a website that's using that now called blockpost.network. There will be others coming online that are in the works. There's just a lot of moving parts at once. If anybody remembers, quite a while ago, there was a project that I built called MetaLens, which allowed you to comment on any website, such as maybe an article you've come across that has some kind of information but has comments disabled. This would allow you to comment directly on those things, but it actually takes it much further and says you can actually comment on anything as long as there's a global identifier. So you could picture one of the things that if I ever do get time, I've been wanting to do this for the longest time, but I do want to build a little app that lets you kind of scan a barcode of a product in a store and immediately pull up comments from the blockchain related to that barcode. It's just any unique identifier like that could be used as the thing to hitch onto. And then you could see this public world of data related to that thing from the blockchain. You could imagine doing this with geo coordinates, for example, and comment on a specific spot on a map. But really, open your imagination and think about any public identifier can be used as an anchor point for putting social media content, on that context. And let's see if there was anything else from my notes here. No, I think that's probably good enough for now. And I'll just mention that I am traveling right now, and I have a band of roving children up above me. So apologize in advance for any viral moments that get created here.
No worries, it's all gone very smoothly so far. Thanks, Luke. I really enjoyed the presentation. You actually anticipated, annoyingly, a lot of my questions that I had for you. Especially, it's very interesting to hear that notion of just commenting on anything, globally unique, because that's obviously something that is, having unique identifiers for digital and physical things is a big theme in supply chain as well. So that kind of bridges this kind of social media world and also some of the less sexy but useful applications of blockchain. I did have one thing I wanted to very briefly ask you, because when we're talking about problems with the internet, and I think a lot of people tend to boil them down, myself included, into this kind of issue with the advertising-based revenue model. So, these large social network, social media companies, their main way of making money is from advertising by collecting lots of data, and then using that data and advanced algorithms to actually show the correct adverts to the correct people. And that's where a lot of the problems come from. But obviously, you and Tonic Pow, you're kind of you don't hate advertising, clearly, because it's a business that's built on advertising. But I wanted to maybe ask, what's the distinction between this kind of classic online advertising world and model and the Tonic Pow version of things? What's the kind of the crux of that distinction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it boils down to our affection for and recognition of the importance of a distributed, social environment where there are many participants and not giant data silos. We want to be incredibly respectful of that and be incredibly compatible with that, whereas the existing players are going to be very much the opposite. So hopefully we are a foot in the door to a very new type of model that I hope becomes the norm.
And is that kind of would you describe it as more peer-to-peer? Because I know it's kind of individuals are doing the advertising instead of the company, right?
Yeah, I mean, right now we are a platform in the middle of all this, but very much our goal is to minimize our role in all of that and allow people to make mutual agreements between them. And you know, one thing that I'll mention here that I think is really important. I mean, you look at people who spend their lives building an audience on social media like YouTube channels and things like this, and then one day, because of something completely innocuous that they say that's not dangerous to anybody or not particularly harmful, is deemed advertiser unfriendly, and their livelihood is taken away from them very abruptly. And this is all because we've become very, very dependent on this siloed system. And I think the way that we break out of that is this idea of co-opetition, where we have many participants submitting content that all are also able to show content from the other providers, and together they make up a larger network effect that hopefully ends up rivaling these giant data silos. And that's when we're really talking about being able to make a difference here.
Yeah, and I guess one thing maybe also to mention is that these problems are also a huge problem for the companies themselves. Like, just policing things become a huge headache. I'm sure that if there is a solution, who knows how hard it might be to actually work in principle, but if there is a solution, they're surely going to want to users as well, so it doesn't always fall on them to be the arbiters of things right online.
Yeah, I mean, I would look for solutions that are much more friendly to things like free speech and allowing individuals to set their own filtering and things like this. I mean, I like the idea anyway that there's many platforms that could then censor this stuff. And of course, they're going to have a responsibility, a legal responsibility, to filter certain types of information. So that's to be expected. But there's many companies and organizations out there who are very happy to show anything out there, and they don't consider certain types of speech necessarily bad. They consider them to be an opportunity to rebut. And that's the way that we should have discourse. If somebody says something hateful or something like that, there should be an indication that that's a very stupid opinion, for lack of a better way to say it. And that's actually very valuable, and that communicates something. I don't think that we should all be so sensitive to everything. But again, that's my opinion, and a lot of this stuff should be left up to the individual platform providers to decide how that goes.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I wanted to also maybe ask just on a slightly more technical level, but not too technical. So in terms of your platform, maybe just to emphasize for the audience. So what parts of this are just very kind of business logic, and what parts do you really need a blockchain for? What functions could you not live or not implement without having Bitcoin SV in the middle here?
Well, it's very, very similar to what Connor's answer to this was. Having an immutable record that's sort of neutral is huge. I mean, it means that you don't have to trust us. It means that third parties can ingest this data and show it in a way that they deem appropriate. Of course, you could do this sort of thing with APIs, but companies revoke API keys. If you're just ingesting raw data off the blockchain that we put there, we tag with certain metadata, you can display it in whatever way that you think is actually appropriate to get to the information, and you don't have to trust that we're not massaging things in order to convince you of one thing or another. And the other most obvious thing is the micropayments. I mean, there literally is no other blockchain-based system that can deliver what we do, which is on a good day, we're doing thousands and thousands of small payments that are, in some cases, many of them are as low as a penny. Where can I go to deliver that, especially also including some kind of metadata? It's just not going to happen. There's nothing else that even tries to compete with that. So that's what we're using for.
It kind of sounds to me like that's one of the key things is how could you achieve this kind of 1 penny 1 cent transfer otherwise, right? That's where micropayments really become valuable, and then at scale that can become profitable for people as well.
Right.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks very much. That was a fascinating talk.
Yeah.
So I'd like to bring back in Connor now. We will still have a kind of short Q&A session. So if anyone does still have a question from the audience that they would like to ask, now is a really good time, and hopefully we can kind of put them live to Luke and Connor. And I'll also, I've picked up on some of the things from David's talk that I thought he emphasized. So I maybe will put some of those as questions to you guys as well. So the first thing I noted down was, you mentioned accountability of big tech firms, and the fact that they're not necessarily accountable to themselves. So maybe if I come to you first, Connor, like what is the role of the blockchain in accountability? Is it powerful for that kind of thing? How can it actually help improve that situation, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is my opinion, so like, for example, in today's world, everyone gets upset with Twitter and YouTube and all these companies if they take down content that they don't like or they censor. My view is that that's totally the right of the company. I mean, if Twitter doesn't want certain things in their platform, they're more than welcome, in my opinion, to take that off their platform. The problem is that there's no way to move, like, if your entire digital footprint is owned by Twitter, for example, then if they ban you off the platform, there's no recourse for you to move away from their platform onto a new one, right? So in my opinion, the benefit of a blockchain is, which, to be very clear, you could have all this on a blockchain, but if Twitter still, for example, maybe the data is submitted through Twitter's platform, and maybe they encrypt all the data to a key that they own, right? For example, then the blockchain doesn't help you still, because the data is on chain, but you have no way of accessing the data, right? So this is what Luke was talking about, and I know, because I've had 100 conversations about this, because we're both kind of on the same wavelength of this is how we want it to go, is we need to have open protocols on the blockchain that companies build on top of, because that means that, whether I'm using Twitter or I'm using Gab or I'm using Twitch, all these other different social platforms, if the company does something that I don't like, or maybe just their UI I don't like, right? Maybe I just like a better UI or a different UX, then I can take my data and move it to a separate platform. So the blockchain has the potential to help, just because it is a global ledger shared by everybody. But I mean, you could build siloed infrastructure on top of the blockchain too. The blockchain is essentially just a database. So the blockchain can help, but just because you take something and put it on a blockchain doesn't mean that all of a sudden it's free and open, right? So it can help us hold those companies accountable. I guess but it doesn't automatically build that requirement, if that makes sense. That's my perspective on it, at least.
Yeah, I agree. You shouldn't really treat it as a magic bullet in that sense. And I guess it's, for me as well, just, it sounds simplistic, but the fact that you are putting things through an immutable ledger, the key word being immutable, is that you then make things traceable and transparent. Even if it's just you're recording changes to a system, you're at least putting something more on the table. You're putting more skin in the game, essentially, than the companies are currently. So I think for me that is a key thing. Luke, do you also have any opinions on that?
The only thing I'll add is just it's the transparency of it. If you're putting something on there, and then you decide to censor something, it's known. So in that way, people can then take it from there to hold you accountable. It's not that it automatically happens, but at least there's opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. So I was kind of interested in this other phrase that we hear a lot. We actually didn't hear it today so much, but people often talk about owning your data, and I want to know kind of, that means a lot of different things to different people, and people, I think, tend to use that as another way of describing their issue with the internet. Like, it's a catch-all term for these platforms against us, kind of. So I wanted to know, maybe from both of you, and again, I'll come to you, Connor, first, but what's your interpretation of that phrase from the perspective of Veritas and Brightview, and how, are your platforms kind of helping to improve things on that front at all, in your view?
Yeah, in the same way, own your data is awesome, but it would be very easy to build an application that uses the blockchain where you don't own any of the data either, right? So I just want to make that clear. The blockchain isn't that magic bullet But what the blockchain allows us to do, let's say if you wanted to build this around ECDSA, which is inherent to Bitcoin, the users themselves can hold the keys, or maybe a shared key between them and the application. If the user wants to revoke access from the application or from any third party, because keys are inherent to Bitcoin's communication protocol, you can own your data in the sense that you can give or revoke access. We can build tooling for you to give or revoke access however you'd like. With that said, so for example, with BrightView, we provision keys for users based on, so Jack, I know you're familiar with the MetaNet protocol. I won't go too into that right now, but we utilize the MetaNet protocol. And the benefit of that is that, a user can hold their own, the keys for their own graph of a data structure. So if they wanted to, and because it's built around MetaNet, any other application, if they said, BrightView sucks as a UI, that I don't like Connor Murray, I'm going to build my own review application, they could just tap into the MetaNet protocol. The user, if they wanted to, for example, could utilize the keys and transfer that to a separate data structure if they wanted, for example. So we allow that. With that said, there is a lot of work to be done in wallet infrastructure and a whole host of other problems. If we really truly do want own your data applications, then I need to be able to take my wallet and be able to transfer it from one application to another, and it needs to make sense. So I feel like I'm kind of dancing around your question because I don't think we're there yet. Actually, I don't think the own your data paradigm is going to be there until we have interoperable wallets that are kind of handling the keys in a way that I'd like to see. But with that said, it's possible. And we're building workarounds to let you do it, but we're getting there little by little. I feel like I danced around your question, but the answer is yes. It's just, I just want to reiterate, like, all because it's on a blockchain doesn't mean you now own it. There's still tooling that needs to be built to actually allow that paradigm to emerge.
Yeah, and I think I posed it slightly in a way that you had to dance around it anyway. But I think it's a perfectly good answer. And I think what you're showing is that even just this level of interaction, you're giving back to the user something, even if it's just the keys to their graph. That's a transaction between the platform and the user that doesn't really exist typically. You're at least, that seems strictly better to me than what there is currently. Luke, I don't know if you'd also wanted to come in on that as well. If you have if you can.
Yeah, sure.
If you have a way of answering that.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say for Tonic Pow is that's not where we're really able to start. I mean, for us, the goal was definitely more about onboarding and getting people into the system without having to go through the extra friction of getting into wallets and all of this stuff, and that was a priority. However, as mentioned in the presentation, where we want to end up is with open protocols for a lot of this stuff. Like eventually, when you create a campaign, that will be an on-chain record that is established, with your own keys that make it yours, and invite other participants to come in or to be able to leave Tonic Pow and go and do this with another company, or to have a fraction system where maybe the person who got the advertiser on board is with a whole different company and the promoter came in through Tonic Pow or vice versa, and all of this just works seamlessly because of the fact that we're leaning on the key system that Bitcoin provides us. So ultimately, yes, we plan to lean more and more on Bitcoin, and I do think that this is important, and it is important to kind of get us as much out of the middle as possible, and that actually helps us get there.
Yeah, sure. That sounds like, again, like a sensible route, and it's not necessarily, again, we've talked about saving the internet, and both of you are kind of solving specific problems within that. So I think it's quite refreshing to hear, there's like scope to these challenges. We can't be too bombastic about solving everything with one magic bullet, as people like to say with blockchain. I also wanted to maybe just as a last question, and open to whoever wants to answer. But one of the things that I picked up on about Mastodon from David's talk And again, I'm not as familiar with Macedonia myself, but it did seem like you said, Luke, about the structure of the network and the structure of the participants in the network, and that was one technological aspect to it. But I guess the one we've seen more in Bitcoin SV already, and with the micropayments you mentioned, the other aspect of it is the economics, so the payments, and for me, I've always been quite enamored with this concept of, I call it like asymmetry of incentives. So if you can make a non-zero cost to doing an action, then that immediately creates this asymmetry between the high volume of fake accounts or fake bots, etc., and the average user who will only incur a small cost compared to someone who's trying to take advantage of the system. So I don't know, what do you guys think about social media and that kind of paradigm of pay to do something, like pay to click, pay to like, or pay to read, that kind of thing?
I think that
it's late in that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fantastic. I do think that the actual introduction of payments solves a ton of these problems, and it's a huge part of it. And this is where I think that the ideas in Mastodon, there's a lot of great ideas as far as, decentralizing the actual ownership of the underlying data. But I just think Bitcoin can actually do this better. What we really want is a centralized database that is decentralized in its ownership model, right? And that actually gives us the best of both worlds. And as far as the payment part goes, it is a natural spam filter and bot filter and all these other wonderful things that you just can't get when everything is free. There was, that comment in the previous presentation, was like centralized bad, decentralized good. Well, I think that just lacks nuance.
Yeah, that's well said, actually. I remember even like when Craig had mentioned, like in one of his first speeches he made, he said a central system, and everyone was like, "Oh, central system." But Luke's so right. I mean, the benefit of Bitcoin is that it is central,
yes,
but distributed, and that means, for example, for us, I could care like less about the other stuff that's going on in the blockchain. I only really care about my own transactions, and if I think starting from if you're a builder, starting from the perspective of let me build this, but then have to account for everything else that's happening globally, you're going to trap yourself into an unscalable application anyway. Yeah, I agree with everything Luke said.
Okay, well, that's a healthy place to end. It's always nice to have a agreement and consensus. But yeah, I have to say I also was in some broad agreement with everything there as well. But yeah, thank you both very much for your time and answering all the questions. And I'm sure if anyone, you guys gave, I think, some contact details, but if anyone watching does want to pose a question to either of you, I'm sure just reaching out on social media, etc., will be good enough. But thank you again so much for sharing information about your platforms, and I'm very excited to see where they go next. So just to draw things to a close, I'm going to just very happily announce we do have our next event scheduled already for October, and I'm extremely pleased that you can see I've added a little button there that says this will be our first in-person event back since the start of COVID-19. So yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing lots of people back in Cardiff and seeing you all in person to have a few more talks and go back to the way things were. But we've also really been spoiled doing these online events to have people like Luke and Connor being able to join us from America and giving us some more perspectives that we weren't necessarily been able to drag you over to Wales. Maybe one day we'll get you over if CoinGeek ever comes for a conference. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But thank you very much again for joining today. And if anyone in still watching does want to go and register, you can click the button at the top of the screen now. That will go register you for that next meetup in October. So if you are in Wales and you can make that, then we'd love to have you along. But other than that, then all I have to say is thanks again for everyone for joining. Thank you for Luke, Connor, and also David for the wonderful presentations. And please enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you.